Welcome to Pensar Basketball Live, and we are going to be talking about why the Toronto Raptors are struggling. Are they struggling? It's not so bad. It's 6-8. It could be worse. It certainly could be better. And we did a live last night that has been temporarily moved to private. It will be back up, but the Raptors lost to a team last night that is better than them in the records, and is much worse at shooting threes. Refer your eyes to this. Here's a quick stat. The Toronto Raptors are not the worst three-point shooting team in the league. And this is going to be more surprising when I show you the next list. But they are 23rd. The Sacramento Kings, the Lakers, the Orlando Magic are worse technically. In terms of, you're thinking, okay, well, the Raptors don't have three-point shooters, Rob. They're okay in terms of efficiency, but they're not taking enough. They're completely middle of the pack. Here are teams that are taking fewer threes than the Raptors per game: Denver, OKC, the New Orleans Pelicans, the Miami Heat, and the Phoenix Suns. By the way, all of those teams are good teams, and they are all above 500. So why are the Raptors actually struggling? And why does the media insist on blaming three-point shooting? Well, I think our brains are pretty slow to adjust to things that are new. And typically speaking, our eyes want to see what they want to see. So at the end of the day, if you thought this team had no three-point shooters and you see a game where they shoot 13% from three, that confirms your bias that this team doesn't have three-point shooters. I'm going to argue that this team didn't have three-point shooters because of largely two players. Those two players are Scotty Barnes and Dennis Schroeder. That was the complication, right? You lose Fred VanVleet, you're replacing him with Dennis Schroeder. Schroeder is not a great three-point shooter. You have Scotty Barnes. He shot 29% from three last year. He is not very good either. So refer your eyes to this, okay? Now I'm going to try to make myself a little bit smaller. I'm going to make myself bigger, and we're going to get to the bottom of why the Raptors are struggling. By the way, just a quick thing. There are a few other things that the Raptors struggle with this year. They're struggling with turnovers a lot, okay? Their bench efficiency has been terrible. I will show you that graph as well. Actually, let me show you that right now. You're not going to be very pleased to know that the most efficient bench in terms of field goal percentage is the Indiana Pacers, who the Raptors face today. The least efficient bench in the NBA is the actual Toronto Raptors bench. Now, it is very, very easy to say it is because the players on the bench are not very good. I will argue the contrary, and I'll make a case for it. Okay, I promise. Sometimes I feel bad for these bench dudes, man. They have been the whipping boys. And then you can change the faces. Malachi is consistent, but you can move Gary into the starting lineup. He's fine, but then you move him to the bench, and apparently he's part of the trash too. How can you move a guy who's been starting for you for 2 years to the bench? Most teams, when they move a starter to the bench, improve their bench. Why does the bench continue to struggle? So let's take a look at this, shall we? And let's see if we can't get to the bottom of this. There are some more stats worth mentioning. The Raptors, as I mentioned, struggle with turnovers. They struggle with free throws. They are one of the worst. They're the second worst free throw shooting team now in the NBA. So we can, pinpoint that and figure out who is or isn't contributing to this terrible free throw shooting percentage. Obviously, Jakob Poeltl not being a good free throw shooter is going to hurt that. I do want to say, however, that this lineup data of being 23rd in the NBA in terms of three-point shooting efficiency is actually being carried by the two guys who were supposed to be the worst three-point shooters on your team. They're also the two guys who've taken the most threes on your team. Three things that really, really should be factored in when thinking about the Raptors' three-point shooting. Because one thing that the Raptors have done really well under Darko Rajakovic is they have moved from the bottom tier of assists per game, which is kind of where they were last year, to the top tier. They have been all the way from first, second, third, and I think currently they fall fourth in the NBA in assists per game. Assists per game is not a holy grail of all good teams have high assists. The San Antonio Spurs have high assists because of the system that Greg Popovich runs, and they are an absolutely awful team. The Indiana Pacers are leading the league in assists, and they are a pretty good team, and you're going to find that out tonight. So the Raptors have successfully sort of changed their play style, but things are still not working, and teams, the pieces still feel a little bit disjointed. So in terms of three-point attempt rate, I think it's worth noting that these are your top guys in terms of three-point attempt rate. That is Otto Porter Jr., who has missed half the games and has barely played for you. Okay, he's your top. 3-point attempt rate is a measure of how often you take threes per 100 possessions relative to the rest of your shots. So this is a ratio, and Otto Porter is a guy who takes a lot of threes. If you want to just take it on volume per 100 possessions, then you could look at 3-point attempts per 100 possessions. In whatever I present to you, ultimately, you're going to see something that is going to stick out. Number one, OG Anunoby has missed 4 games. Okay. And since he's come back, by the way, the last 2 games, he's been awful. He has registered back-to-back negative box plus minus games. This was not the case earlier. His box plus minus has fallen all the way from 2.5 to like 0.7 now. So he is really struggling with that finger since he's come back. He's a rhythm player. It sometimes happens with him, but I suspect he'll get back to where he was a little bit earlier in the season. Grady Dick is your second guy in terms of per 100 possessions, how many threes he takes. And he is shooting 24%. And if I had told you with a straight face that Grady Dick would be shooting 24%, I think you would have thought I was absolutely crazy. It's not, like Gary Trent Jr. has missed 3 games. He has been your third leading guy in terms of attempts per 100 possessions, and he has missed 3 very crucial games. And he struggled overall from the field. He posted his worst game, I think, of the season last night with a negative 13 box plus minus. He was absolutely terrible, 1 for 6. But he's also missed time. And then your fourth guy in terms of attempts per 100 possessions is Jalen McDaniels. And he is shooting 8 per 100 possessions, and he is making 16.7%. Last night was, by the way, his best game of the season. And he's shooting, as I said, 16.7%. Those are not good. Okay. I mean, you either have guys, and then you have Otto down here who's shooting pretty well from 3, and he's shooting it at a decent clip, but ultimately he has missed half your games and he doesn't play a lot of minutes. And then you have Scotty Barnes, the surprise, and you have Dennis Schroeder, surprise, and they're shooting identical from 3. They are shooting 38.6% from 3, which is significantly above league average. If I were to break down your 3-point percentage in terms of the above average mark, there's your above average mark. All of those players are technically above league average 3-point shooters, league average being 36% this year. Here are your guys who are below league average. Grady Dick, not expected. Jalen McDaniels, not really expected, but he was like a 34% 3-point shooter coming in, so maybe kind of expected, but he shot 40% last year for Philly, so maybe not so expected. Precious Achiuwa, 23.5%, kind of expected. And Pascal Siakam taking 5.7 per 100 possessions, and he is at 23.6%. That is pretty much your problem in a nutshell, that your better 3-point shooters haven't played very much or very many minutes, and your supposedly other better 3-point shooters aren't shooting very well. So where do these numbers factor in terms of where they should be or where they might be? Because shooting variance is very much a thing. It's very difficult to judge a shooting sample on 14 games. There are sometimes great 3-point shooters. I'm pretty sure I could take you through a stretch of Steph Curry's, career where he shot 29% for like 10 games. It happens. Klay Thompson has had those. I mean, shooters have to keep shooting. And if you believe that Jalen McDaniels and Grady Dick and Gary Trent Jr. and Malachi, all these guys are shooters, which clearly you do think that they are, then they have to just keep shooting. And you have to trust that at the 82 game mark, that these numbers will balance themselves out. It also goes for the other side, right? You have guys like Chris Boucher shooting uncharacteristically high. So he is shooting like 43.5%. Can that possibly continue? Probably not. So you're going to have some numbers dip, some numbers raise, and you're going to have to trust that the numbers that rise will outperform the numbers that dip. What numbers could dip? Well, let's see. These 2 numbers should probably dip at some point. Scotty Barnes, I believe that he put in a lot of work. I pretty much expect him to be at a 35 to 36% clip this year. He has shot above 40% from 3 for much of the season so far. So being a 42%, 39.8%, whatever, I mean, this is very encouraging, but once teams start to guard him a little bit more, these percentages should fall back right down to 35 to 36%, and that would be solid. I think if I told you at some point when he was drafted that he would ever post 36% 3-point shooting, you would have told me I was crazy. So the fact that he has, through 14 games, sustained it for 38.6%, I think is pretty encouraging. So what I'm trying to tell you is that the Raptors are 23rd in the league in 3-point shooting, and A, their 3-point shooters are not hitting, And B, their other 3-point shooters are not really playing. And C, they're being carried by the two guys who were the reason that everyone thought they were going to be bad at 3-point shooting. So can we end this narrative that the Raptors are bad at 3-point shooting and that that's the reason that they're losing? That's actually not the reason that they're losing. And I think it's pretty low hanging fruit. To the point of the bench, the bench being bad, I'll agree that the bench lineups have been bad. But I think it's a far cry to say the bench lineups have been bad versus the bench has been bad. So let's look at the box plus minus, right? Do not look at Marquise Noel, Garrett Temple. I mean, those numbers are absurd, largely because those players have played, 20 minutes combined. But look at, who your best players have been on the year, right? This can't be. This cannot be. Your best players on the season cannot be Scotty Barnes, Dennis Schroeder, Jakob Poeltl, and OG Anunoby, and you expect to be a good team. Okay, this guy right here is the sore thing. He's the one that sticks out. Okay, this is significantly below. If I showed you Pascal Siakam last year to this year, I think you're going to cry in terms of where his numbers were and where his numbers are. The fall off is immense. Look at the season to season fall off. Okay, we are not talking about a huge fall off in terms of true shooting percentage. He's just shooting 1% worse. Okay. He's taking a few more threes. He's not taking drastically more threes. Where is the real fall up? Free throw attempt rate. That's a pretty big fall off. Rebound percentage it's a fall off enough. Is his usage so much lower? It's 2% lower. But I mean, over the last 7 games in which you have been below 500, his usage has been above 27%. So that's not really the problem here. The real problem is just in terms of his impact, man. His impact has not been felt at all. His efficiency as a playmaker has been decent, but he's been a little bit more turnover prone. His activity level as a defender, I mean, his block percentage has plummeted by 1%. I mean, it was not great to begin with. Just look at where it was as a rookie to look at where it is now. I mean, this is significantly below. You cannot have a guy who's just posting significantly below career averages across the board. His impact metrics, the fall off is immense, right? I mean, like if you look at this is his worst. I mean, in terms of box plus minus, this is his worst year since his rookie year, right? I mean, I would be curious actually to see if this is worse than Tampa. Hang on, I'll let you know in a second if this is worse than Tampa. Sorry, not Tampa. It's worse than the bubble. Let's see, bubble. No, it's not worse than the bubble. Thank God. It is not worse than the bubble. He is okay. Congratulations. He's better than the bubble. But he has been not good. And I think that might be one of the reasons that you're struggling because, the guy who's supposed to be your best player, or at the very least, your second best player, is currently your 5th best player. And I would say that the guy who's currently your 3rd best player, it probably shouldn't be starting. And, I mean, you can make a lot of cases that some guys started slow, whatever. Maybe your record would be a little bit different if you had OG Anunoby for 14 games. I think we've seen enough of OG Anunoby to say you're not going to factor in that OG Anunoby is going to play every single game of the year. And to be honest, I think the defense has slipped. So let's look at, lineups. Let us explore, let's say, 10 possible reasons the Raptors could be bad. And I'll try to buzz through these. Number 1, new offense. Okay. Let's just assume for a second that it takes a while to implement a new offense that runs completely counterintuitive to the previous offense that you ran. I think that makes sense, right? And I think a lot of people thought that this would take a little while. I think they've done a pretty good job, but there have been some issues with buy-in. There have been issues with communication. It doesn't look like the body language has been super great, and there hasn't been a lot of consistency. There have been a lot of slow starts. I believe the statistic was that the Raptors have been down double digits in the first half in like the 7 of the last 9 games. That's not great. Okay, so they're not really coming out crisp, right? Number 2, shooting variance. As I said, sometimes it's just luck, right? The Raptors are missing open threes, a lot of them, right? And I mean, they're not generating the greatest threes. And I think that, there's a really good chance that we play this out throughout the year. And, in terms of 3-point shooting percentage, maybe some of these numbers dip a little bit, but it's hard to imagine for an entire year that Pascal Siakam is going to just drop from like a 30-ish% 3-point shooter on his career to 23.6. I mean, that seems a little bit hard to buy. It also feels really hard to buy that Dennis Schroeder is going to continue shooting 38.6%, right? But at the end of the day, the good and bad should weigh out in the favor of the good, right? I think at some point, when Otto plays more, OG plays more. Gary hopefully figures it out at some point. I do believe you start making more threes, but you also start taking more threes at a higher percentage. Because right now, a lot of the players that are playing in their place maybe aren't taking as many threes. And, to the guys who are really, really struggling, like as I said, Pascal Siakam, Precious Achua, and Jalen McDaniels, I mean, it's hard to imagine, players shooting this poorly. NBA professionals shooting 16% from three. It's very possible it's just an extremely cold start, right? So let's go that. Number three, strong schedule, man. You have played some very tough teams. I'm not trying to make excuses, but schedule is what it is. You play who's in front of you. You played Orlando last night. Maybe initially when we were doing strength of schedule, they weren't supposed to be a good team. Well, guess what? It matters when you play teams, right? You lucked out. You played the Bucks early before they made adjustments. You blew them out. You played them after they made adjustments. It didn't even matter that Giannis wasn't playing. They blew you out. So it just matters sometimes when you play a team. I mean, I don't really want to play Charlotte right now, but maybe in a month, I would love to play Charlotte. I don't know. Right. So again, it's weird when I look at strength of schedule and I see this team, this team, this team is good, and this team is bad. And then at the end of the day, like you end up playing a bad team when they're feeling really good about themselves, and you end up lucking out because you face a good team when they're feeling really bad about themselves. I think the Raptors have let a lot of winnable games slip. I think it's really important to notice that they have actually been in a lot of games late that they have screwed up. Um, some have gone their way, most have not, right? San Antonio, Washington, and Chicago and Minnesota remind me of close games where things could have broken either way, but they didn't, right? But then there's also games like the Milwaukee game where you had a really strong run late. Maybe you can argue that was never going to necessarily be bridged. But then there's definitely the game in Chicago where you're clearly screwed over by the refs. And if we're talking about that, then maybe we're talking about a team that's 500 right now. And we're not complaining so much because somehow that nice number of 500 seems a lot better subconsciously. Let's talk about the fourth thing, Dennis Schroeder's role. I don't like how much Dennis Schroeder runs the offense. I think this is a really big problem. I have been pretty firm that this is an issue pretty much the entire year so far. And I can't say it anymore. And I realize that he's playing really well for the most part, but he's playing well in a role that is not optimized to his strengths. And while I understand that that is pretty much the case across the roster, you're having a lot of guys do things that they're not necessarily the best at right now so that they'll develop. In the case of Precious Achiuwa and Malachi Flynn, I can sort of understand it. In the case of OG Anunoby, there's a high leverage, opportunity here in terms of high potential upside. In terms of okay, if we can run OG through some of his errors with being a pick and roll ball handler and an isolation scorer, et cetera, and just move him off of his typical corner three shooter PJ Tucker type package, then there's some dividends to be paid out later because he'll develop and he's a young player in your system and he's still 25, 26 years old. And okay, fine. There's something to grow there. With Dennis Schroeder, he's 30 years old, man. He's a quick twitch point guard who's 30 years old. He is trying to get one last bag. I do not see the point at all in trying to develop him into a role that he is not necessarily suited for at this point. And yeah, I would much rather live with Scotty running point. And if that results in slightly more turnovers, then I'll live with it. If it results in slightly less, efficient pick and roll ball, it's not going to because Scotty's been better in pick and roll. But I just think Dennis would be better off the bench. But we'll talk about that for sure. Number 5, lineups. I cannot stop harping about Darko Rajakovic's lineups. And I think that the bench is struggling largely because they are often placed in situations where they have just not enough around them. I think there is a solution to this, and I'll talk about that in terms of bench efficiency. Let's just talk about that anyways. It was going to be my number 8 point anyway. I would try something different, and whether Darko Rajakovic is open to moving Dennis Schroeder to the bench so that he can allow Gary to start, that would be a suggestion. But if he's not willing to do that, I would try to play Pascal Siakam and Dennis Schroeder more with the bench and sort of invert my starting lineup / rotations. So instead of having Scotty go to the bench at the 6-minute mark and then come back with the bench, I would much rather try Siakam and Schroeder out right away and see if they can do it. I'm going to say this for one reason. They seem to be very ball dominant players who like to sort of play one-on-one. Okay. This is exactly what you want to do if your bench unit is not clicking. Now, obviously, in theory, it sounds great. Scotty with movement shooters sounds like a great idea, but you've tried it for 14 games, and I think you've done it for 14 games straight, and it really hasn't worked. I don't think for more than 1 or 2 games. It's just not great. There has been some promising data for Scotty plus OG plus that unit, but I would just try Siakam plus Schroeder plus that unit because Siakam plus Schroeder is just they like to play one on one, man. Schroeder, he likes to dribble the basketball. You're having guys coming off of screens that are not being set properly. They're taking shots that they're not hitting. It's really destroying their confidence. Scotty, should be more assertive with that second unit. He hasn't been for whatever reason. I mean, you would think that he would just come out and, put up 10 points and just kind of carry that unit until defenses start to collapse on him. But as much as, you want to put him out there with 4 guys and just kind of say sink or swim, like if you're not going to do this, then we're going to force feed you this. If you're starting Dennis Schroeder already, you might as well just allow him to get his touches with that unit. And then maybe what you could do is start Scotty at the 1, Dennis at the 2, and then move Dennis to the 1 with the second unit, right? I think it would be worthwhile considering going bigger. So instead of having Malachi Flynn constantly in the rotation, as I know that it is some sort of feel good story for this team, as much as I've come around on Malachi and I like him a lot more, I mean, the data is not lying to you, man. Like what you're trying to leverage here is not great. Hang on, let me pull this up. So he's been a negative 1.6 boxes minus guy. I mean, he's had good games, he's had bad games, he's been okay. He doesn't get to the line nearly as well as you would like to. He doesn't rebound very well. I think you're an above average rebounding team. So despite all the concerns about defensive rebounding, etc., the Raptors are one of the better rebounding teams. They're a top 10 rebounding team. But if him being in the lineup means that you are putting Otto Porter out of the lineup, I think you're losing more than you're getting, regardless of what you think you might be able to get in terms of, what you think you're salvaging. I mean, Otto and Chris Boucher is older than Otto Porter. I don't know why people think Otto is like 100 years old. I mean, he's younger than Chris Boucher. He's the same age as, Dennis Schroeder. He's a more valuable player than either one of those guys. He's a better player than both those guys. I really don't understand. And he's very portable and he kind of just moves off things. He does the right things on the basketball court. You need players like this on the court. And the Raptors have been better with him than without him. So I cannot understand the idea of him collecting DMPCDs while some of these players play. And if you're not going to do this and you cannot sacrifice Malachi's minutes, then cut them back a little bit, man. You got to cut them back a little bit. I mean, he's not nearly good enough to warrant this level of usage. I will, however, say that despite, all his poor shooting, he is still shooting better from the field than Pascal Siakam, right? If I sort by true shooting percentage, where are we right now, right? I mean, your most efficient guys obviously are going to be your super low minutes guys like Garrett Temple, but Jakob Poeltl, OG Anunoby, Chris Boucher, Otto Porter, Scotty Barnes. Like those are your 5, right? And then you go to Dennis Schroeder, Malachi Flynn, Pascal Siakam. How is Pascal Siakam your 8th most efficient rotation guy? Yeah, that has to get better. Malachi Flynn, I think it's just there's too much of him, and this 2-point guard unit is just not working for me, right? Like, especially when you're outsized, you're going up against a bigger team. If you're going up against an OKC, if you're going up against a team like that that's running bigger guards, you just can't. You lose so much. And I'd love to tell you that you're making up for it, with size in the middle because you have Jakob Poeltl, but it's just not working. He had a pretty bad game last night too. Okay, moving on. Barnes' free throw attempt rate. I think, there's very little to be said about like, okay, Scotty's not doing this well or Scotty, whatever, but I think you can make a very, very clear case that his free throw attempt rate has not been good enough. And it needs to get better. So in terms of free throw attempt rate, factor out those 2 guys. The best guys at getting to the line are Chris Boucher, Pascal Siakam, Jakob Poeltl, Dennis Schroeder. Scotty Barnes is slightly worse at getting to the line than Dennis Schroeder. That cannot be, my friend. I mean, you are 6'9", And I realized that there are compounding factors that are preventing him from getting into the paint various times. He's turning into more of a jump shooter because that's what his team needs. But I think it's, very, very bad process to not attack as often as he has chosen not to attack. I think it's one thing when casual fans say, "Oh, he should just drive to the paint all the time." No, that's completely ridiculous as well. But he is not drawing enough fouls for his usage and his skill set. So he needs to get this number up closer to a little bit past where Pascal Siakam is. So Pascal is at 28.4. Um, that's fallen off. That's low by Pascal standards. He has to get past that standard. If those two guys can get to the line at a rate of 30, I think you'll be much better off. If they can start hitting free throws, I think you'll be even better off. Improving free throw shooting is not something that I really know what to say about, but the guys that are really struggling at the line are okay. So you got Dennis Schroeder at 84%, you got Chris Boucher at 80%, you got Scotty Barnes at 75%. Everything below that is yikes. Okay. You got Pascal Siakam at 70.5%, Malachi Flynn at 66.7% as a guard. He hasn't taken that many, but I mean, like he's missed his healthy share. Precious Achua at 63.6%, OG Anunoby at 61.9%. He's too good a shooter to shoot that poorly. And Gary Trent, who has just magically just forgotten how to shoot free throws, at 56%, and Jakob Poeltl at 50%. I mean, this is really bad. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rotation guys at under 71% free throw shooting. What the hell is going on with this team? Like, that's shocking. Is that, let me know in the comments, is that shocking? Like, that's absolutely ludicrous, right? So, I mean, I don't know. Okay, moving on. I already mentioned bench efficiency. Number 9, Pascal Siakam's fall off. What do you do? Right now, I flashed this graphic a couple of lives ago and last live, so I'll flash it again. You have a conundrum on your hands. Pascal Siakam with low usage equals low impact. Pascal Siakam with high usage equals Barnes low usage, which equals lower development. It's a weird trade-off, but it is factual. It has happened pretty much every single game. I think last game, if I'm not mistaken, hang on, I'll check Pascal's advanced box score for yesterday, but I'm pretty sure he was lower-ish usage than his usual 36, and he managed to be positive. So maybe that's a positive trend. But in general, like I would say, he has not been very good when he has been asked to be away from the ball. There's a lot of things that he's not doing away from the basketball, and I think that really would be, a conversation to be had with him, and just to sort of ask him, like, hey, what are you doing, man? Like, are you, just not comfortable with this offense? Are you having confusion about this offense? Is there something that we can do to help you out? To sort of teach you like what you need to be doing in certain spots, how to set a pick, how to, the angle of the screen, how to roll hard. Like, I think he knows all of this. He's played this way before, but it doesn't seem to be happening on a consistent basis. There were issues in the first 7 games specifically, and there were issues last night for sure, where away from the basketball, he isn't doing enough to help your spacing. So, I mean, it's just being compounded by the fact that he can't hit free throws and he can't hit threes right now. But it's not even that. That's part of it, but it's not really it, right? Number 10 is the wrong injuries, right? It's kind of like the wrong injuries at the wrong time. Like you're missing OG, but then you're also missing Gary, right? But you're also missing Otto. Like it's a lot to take, right? And I say wrong injuries, wrong time, because there are certain guys that are playing over those guys who are so bad, right? Like if I show you, and this is not to say they'll continue to be so bad, but look at the bottom here, right? Gary Trent, negative 4.1 boxes minus, Grady Dick, negative 9.2, and Jalen McDaniels, negative 8.4. Now, Scotty shares minutes with those 3 guys a lot, okay? So I'm just saying, like, quite frankly, you're going to need a little bit more than just Scotty Barnes to elevate these guys right now. You're going to need to put maybe 2, 3 starters at a time, and maybe adjust this idea that you have of 5 starters, 2 go out, 3 bench come in. Maybe you need to sparse it out a little bit more. Maybe you need to do 1, 1, 1. You can't just do shifts. Maybe that's it. Maybe you have to choose your lineups based on matchups. Maybe you have to just abandon your, concepts of consistency and saying, okay, well, we got to get Malachi in at 7 minutes. I realize this is leaning very much into nurse territory, but until you can get these guys playing better, I mean, you're dying in the minutes that they're on the court. I mean, you really cannot sustain 100. Like, I can't even tell you. There's 109 minutes of Jalen McDaniels so far and 211 minutes of Grady Dick. On average, you have lost almost all your games on those 3 players' minutes. You take those 3 players out of the rotation and you replace them with zeros, which all of them are more than capable of being between -1 and 0 in terms of boxes minus. You're probably like, I don't know, 10 and 4. Like, it's a big difference. These guys play a lot of minutes for you. There's almost 600 minutes between the 3 of them, and you've played 14 games so far. 600 minutes is a lot of minutes, in terms of like, and to get such putrid, and it's so essential too. It's not like you have a Steph Curry who takes, and makes like 6 threes, 7 threes a game. Like, you're dying for this 3-point shooting, and you living on a margin that is so thin, right? And somehow between Scotty and Schroeder, like, you're getting just enough production on the 3-point shooting that you're kind of like floating by. Like, there's quite a few games so far where you've actually outshot the opponent. So I think that that's something. Here are my sort of solutions, and then I'll get off. The obvious: Siakam's buy-in. I think, as I mentioned, it would be very, very crucial at this point to have a conversation with Pascal Siakam about who he is and who he wants to be on this team. Whether he, if he's really concerned about his numbers, give him minutes with the second unit. It certainly cannot be worse. Him posting up, I was very much against him posting up, but if he wants to do that with the second unit and he wants to be the bread and butter of the second unit's offense there, let him sink and swim. If he's going to do it anyway, I'd rather him do it with those lineups as opposed to taking away usage from Scotty and OG. Go take it away from Grady and Jalen McDaniels and Malachi Flynn. Maybe that would be a solution. If you need to get your numbers against second units. It'll also be a really good opportunity, hopefully, to catch one of those teams with a lesser defender to guard him. That could also help him out a lot. So yeah. And I mean, again, when you don't have the basketball, what are you doing for us, right? Can we find a way to hide you on offense when you're not directly involved in the play so that you're not botching the play? Because at the end of the day, if the play calls for you to set a screen and you won't set one, or that you set the sorriest one in the history of the NBA, well, then the play just doesn't work, right? The offense doesn't work. It doesn't click. If the play calls for you to, collapse a double and then pass out, and your pass is just off target, or you turn it over, then the play is broken. It doesn't work, and the other team's going the other way, right? The Raptors have been really high turnover, and it's pretty. I don't know who do you blame for it. I mean, Jakob Poeltl has been incredibly turnover prone at 18%. Malachi Flynn at 17%. Precious Achiuwa at 16%. Grady Dick at 14%. These are not guys who handle the ball a ton. Like, this is ridiculous turnover percentages for these guys. Then you have Scotty at 13.3%. Pascal Siakam at 13%. Pascal's been like 10 before, right? Scotty was at like, wait, was Pascal Siakam? Tim was like 9-10 last year. So these guys are all turning the ball over at a high percentage, which is expected, but not this much. Not this much. You pass the ball more, you're going to turn the ball over more. I get it. The assists are coming on the other side of it, so you are getting something for all these turnovers. But then maybe your transition defense needs to get a lot better. And there needs to be more force and energy with which you guard full court. So when you do end up, turning the ball over and having some of these, sort of stupid fouls, or stupid offensive fouls or whatever, you try to make it so that you can at least get a deflection or something to sort of slow it down, or at least get someone back in the paint to recover. I don't like their transition defense so far. It's been kind of sluggish at times. Dennis Schroeder, for all intents and purposes, has been pretty low turnover percentage in terms of, in relation to his assist percentage. This has been a pretty good ratio to live off of. So while he is technically, in my opinion, not a point guard, he is doing point guard things for your offense while it figures itself out. Is this a temporary stopgap solution? I'm scared it's not. Now, why am I so against Dennis Schroeder being a point guard if he's shooting well and he's performing well? The box plus minus suggests that he is a starter. Why do I want this guy to go to the bench? Is it a bias? Is it something? No, it's not a bias. It is simply that putting the ball this often in terms of time of possession and a guy who's not really shifting the defense is making your offense very stagnant. It often results in guys, he kind of milks the advantage of I've used this term many times, milking the advantage. So he'll go into the paint without really a plan, without really an opportunity, without really a hope and a prayer of getting something off in the paint. Defense knows they're daring him to do it. They know that once he gets into the paint, they just have to put their hands up. He's not a very dynamic finisher. He's not going to get over the defense. Worst case scenario, he's going to take a layup in an area of the court that he has historically been pretty poor at, right? They're daring him to shoot for now. So he is maximizing the scouting report right now. Every single opposing team wants you to run your offense through Dennis Schroeder. I promise you, nobody wants to see Pascal Siakam or Scotty Barnes explode for 40 points. So they're giving you the low-hanging fruit, the dare shot of, okay, we'll live with Dennis Schroeder beating us, but we're not going to let Scotty and Pascal beating us. And they're taking the bait. Now, you need the points, but at the end of the day, if he's running your offense, you're missing. You're missing a lot. You're going to be stagnant. You're going to take a lot of bad shots. You're going to not shift the defense around, which means you're not going to really find any room for your three-point shooters. I would like to do a study and just look back on all the threes the Raptors have taken. I don't think they've been very much in rhythm. I think sometimes when it's going in, like last night, you're getting paint touches and then you're getting kickouts. But I feel for the most part that when I watch other teams play, especially good teams like the Indiana Pacers, the types of threes they're getting feel cleaner, more in rhythm. The passes feel more on target. Dennis is just not that great a passer. He may be a safe passer right now, but it's a little bit like the Fred VanVleet argument, but it's just not, because Fred VanVleet just had a much better idea for pacing the offense. Again, took a lot of really dumb shots. He wasn't very efficient. He was nowhere near as efficient as Schroeder's being right now. And I'm pretty sure if you want to get some jollies, you can easily compare Schroeder's stats to Fred VanVleet's stats and feel very good that you did not pay someone $43 million to effectively do the same thing. But I promise you, when you actually watch them play, there is a big difference in terms of how they manage the game, the flow. And I think Dennis Schroeder doesn't necessarily have the most intuitive feel for how to manage the flow of the game. There isn't always an idea of where to get guys what, how to get guys going. And I think your offense is struggling because it's going through a guy who's not naturally very good at setting up an offense. And I'm surprised that the Raptors continue to do this because it feels like this feels very obvious to me. I think if you asked people to rank out starting point guards in the NBA, I'm pretty sure that people would get to about 35 before anyone thought to even think about Dennis Schroeder. I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just trying to say it how it is. This is the talent gap. This is who you have running your offense. And regardless of the fact that he's performing well because teams are sagging off of him and daring him to shoot. I mean, do you see him taking contested threes? It is a bit weird, right? Like when you look at the box score, you say, where would we be without Dennis Schroeder? I say if he's not on your team, you probably have no real I don't think you're worse. I think he's just there. It's a empty calories type of situation, right? There are guys like this across the league, right? Last year in Charlotte, there was a guy, Kelly Oubre, who scored 20 points per game. He ended up getting a minimum contract the next year because people didn't think those 20 points per game were very impactful. They weren't inefficient. They just weren't very impactful. They're not really moving the needle. I feel very similarly about Dennis Schroeder's production right now. Let's say my second thing would be Darko's reluctance to swap Gary for Dennis in the starting lineup. It has proven over the years that Gary Trent has struggled coming off the bench. He has almost always struggled off the bench, and I'll definitely look into the data on this, but just anecdotally, maybe I'm being wrong about this, but I think there has been a lot of data to support that Gary Trent Jr. is just better as a starter. And Dennis Schroeder has a ton of experience coming off the bench, and he's fantastic at it. Why would you go out of your way to put both guys in positions that they are less comfortable in? Now, Dennis obviously has he is on record saying he has no ego and he doesn't care who starts. If he's lying, which I mean, I'm almost positive he is, then call him on it. Say like, would you like to come off the bench? It might help this guy who's struggling off the bench that we really need to actually get going earlier in the game in the few games that Gary has started in place of OG or whoever's been out, he's been better. He's been better as a starter than he's been off the bench. So I think that it would be a worthwhile experiment for the betterment of the team, because apparently that's what all our leader, Dennis Schroeder, cares about, is the team and winning, apparently. Sorry, I'm being a little bit salty because I just don't believe him. But if he does really believe in that, then ask him to come off the bench. And don't say it's a demotion. Don't say it's whatever. Just say it is the ultimate sacrifice in favor of the team to allow the team to flourish. I would be pretty much 99.9% certain that your offense gets better automatically. You know what doesn't get better? Dennis Schroeder's odds of getting a big contract after next year. That's what doesn't get better. So Darko Rajakovic, if you ever hear this, which you probably won't, man, make a shift, because you have one guy who's struggling, and I think you're losing everywhere on this exchange, right? You're losing everywhere. You might say Dennis Schroeder is shooting better from three than Gary Trent Jr. I'll tell you that Gary Trent Jr. is contested on almost every single three he takes. There's a big difference. The contesting allows for openings for Siakam, Barnes, etc. It will make your entire offense more efficient if you have a player in the starting lineup that they actually have to respect from three. It'll space your offense out a little bit more. He actually has a lot of familiarity playing with this lineup. You already have a lot of lineup data that suggests this lineup works. Why are you doing the not obvious thing? I always say that, sometimes with coaches, there's like one thing they won't adjust. With Detroit, I think it's they won't stop starting Killian Hayes. I don't know why they won't stop starting Killian Hayes. It's very clear he's backup, but they're invested in this idea that Killian Hayes is a starter. Go figure. I don't know. But this idea of Dennis Schroeder having to be a starter is ridiculous. He is not Chris Paul. Okay. This is not the type of talent that you brought into your program. This is not the type of leader you brought into your program. You brought in a career journeyman who has often been a sixth man, often been a starter. I've never seen an offense led, other than FIBA. I've never seen an offense led in the NBA by Dennis Schroeder be successful. Now, if you think that you have found the next iteration of Kyle Lowry, I'll remind you, Kyle Lowry is 4 years younger when you brought him into your program, and he was about 5 times better. Don't mix and match with this. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. Whatever your internal politics, get rid of it. It's not working. I promise you, your spacing gets better with Gary Trent Jr. Your spacing would get better with Otto Porter. Your defense probably suffers a little bit at the point of attack, but your rebounding might get better. So any concept of you being one of the best defensive teams. Now, another adjustment. Earlier in the season, we saw Pascal Siakam further up in the defense, and we saw Scotty kind of back. And a lot of us thought that this was a really great idea. Not because Scotty is the greatest shot blocker in the world, although he is much better than Siakam. The numbers would show that. I mean, do I need to show you that? Here. There you go. Those are the guys that you want on the back end of your defense. And this is the last guy that you want. These two are the last guys that you want on the back end of your defense. There's a third one. There's a fourth one. You don't want these guys on the backside of your defense. They offer no shot blocking. So why in the world would any person in the world ever construct, oh, I get it. Because being front and being point of attack is more taxing. It's more taxing on your legs, leaves less juice for offense. Featuring Pascal Siakam in a higher usage role requires and necessitates you to ease his burden on on defense, doesn't it? There's no reason in the world to make this switch other than that, because it is completely proven. I don't want to say completely proven across 7-8 games. Scotty was thriving as the backside help. Okay. As the weak side shot blocker, he was doing really well. He reads it well. He communicates well back there. Siakam does not. He's a better rebounder. He is a significantly better rebounder, in my opinion. And why you would put, can we look at it? Hold on. So, significant enough. Okay. These numbers have fallen. He was closer to 15 to 16%. But why in the world would you put these guys away from the bench, away from the rim, and put them up, and put this guy who's not a very good rebounder, he's not as good a defensive rebounder. I can't understand it for the life of me, man. I really can't. Otto, Christian Koloko, if he ever plays for you, Jakob Poeltl, Chris Boucher, Scotty Barnes, maximum OG Anunoby. These are the guys who should be your paint defenders. If Pascal Siakam is not going to rebound and he's not going to block shots and he's not really going to offer much resistance, why is he on the backside of your defense? Hide him the way they do Luka Doncic. You don't want to do that because it burns his ego. Well, then put him up. Put him up on the secondary ball handler. Have him and Dennis be the front of your defense. Or have Dennis and like I just don't understand this concept of burning Scotty out. And then, it's not a position that he's naturally great at. Like staying in front of quick twitch point guards is not easy for someone his size, man. Like Pascal is clearly a little bit more laterally capable of doing it, and Scotty is clearly much better at protecting the paint. Why would you flip this? I mean, have you guys noticed this as well? I mean, you'll see it in Scotty's shot blocking. If we were to look at it, hang on, let's just take a look. I'm pretty sure you'll see it in the blocks. Hang on, game logs. One sec. So take a look at block percentage. Let's see where they made the switch. Right there. Do you see that? Dude, like you had one of the better shot blockers in the NBA at 5%, and you've moved him down so much. He didn't get a single block and he got one against Milwaukee. I don't understand the reason for the switch, but you'll notice that the switch is pretty much coinciding right there. Like you take the Boston one out, it's Dallas. Dallas was a switch. So suddenly you got this guy, and this is not the defender. This is not the complete defender we had in the first 8 games. Somewhere in Dallas, it's like the Raptors completely lost their fucking minds, and they went in a completely different direction with the defense. And the defense was looking pretty good. There was no reason to change it other than, hey, Pascal Siakam goes to Coach Darko and says, yo, man, I'm burned out chasing out these point guards and chasing out these guards. And clearly I'm not doing the greatest job, but Scotty was doing enough of a good job to clean up that it wasn't that bad. Do you know what I mean? Like Siakam was giving up a lot of blow-bys. I remember the game, didn't make the switch immediately. I think they made the switch in Washington, if I'm not mistaken. I'll have to look back on the tape when they made this exact switch, but I do remember in Boston, at Boston, the first loss at Boston, that he was guarding Drew a little bit more. They may have made a mid-game adjustment in that game, but certainly as we've gone on more and more, I've seen Scotty guarding guards up high in the defense, and that just takes him away from an area of the court that he could really, really work well in, right? It just doesn't make sense, and the only reason that I can come up to is they want Pascal Siakam to have more juice and more legs for the offense, but his offense has been worse than Scotty's. So what is the point? Like this is purely a team that is struggling, in my opinion, based on luck, variance, strength of shooting, but also because of 2 egos. Really, it's 2 egos. And what other reason could there be to put Dennis Schroeder in the starting lineup and put Gary Trent Jr. on the bench where he's going to struggle, play him 21 minutes in a contract year? I mean, to those of you celebrating Dennis Schroeder here because you're so happy that you got a point guard who's kind of on par with Fred VanVleet, do you ever think about the guy who's put 2-3 years into this program, who's kind of in a contract year? Do you know what I mean? Like, did he see this coming when he opted into his deal? If he saw this coming, maybe he doesn't opt in. Do you see what I mean? Like, this isn't necessarily the most ethical behavior either. I mean, Gary may have bought in and he seems to be playing nice about it, but trust me, if the losses start to pile up, you're going to see more and more Gary Trent Jr. coming in and taking 7 quick 8 shots because he needs to, man. This guy's fighting for his NBA life. You think his next contract, he's going to sign a minimum deal? Because this isn't OG Anunoby. This is not Pascal Siakam. This is not a guy who's going to guaranteed get big money on his next contract, right? I mean, he has some value around the league, but certainly he very well could end up settling for a mid-level exception. If he continues to play like this, he might not even get the mid-level exception. You have to think of it that way. And I personally feel bad for the guy because I don't necessarily think he deserves it. That's just my opinion. I think he would help the starting lineup. Finally, let me try to, get this. The compounding effects of spacing despite shooting. Now, look, I'm willing to buy in that a new offense is going to sometimes struggle and that sometimes you're going to have a situation where guys don't necessarily know where to be. But I feel that spacing is often misunderstood as shooting skill. That if I could just put 5 shooters on the court, that the spacing would automatically solve itself. And I've talked about this many times. This simply is not the case. You actually do need to put people in the right positions. You need to move them in advantageous ways around the court to open up angles for screens, for shooting opportunities. You need to find people popping up above the break. You need to everything that spacing is not just about shooting. It's not just about putting five guys on the court and playing five out and then one guy goes ISO. That's one way to do it, but it's definitely not the only way to do it. One way to do it certainly is to have guys who are constantly on a string in terms of creating space for your offense to generate screens and driving angles. Scotty and Pascal have both struggled with paint congestion all year. It is impacting their free throw shooting. You can say it's their assertiveness, but there's also a compounding issue of Jakob Poeltl being there. Now, I'm assuming that the Raptors are smart enough to realize when they signed Jakob Poeltl that this was going to be an issue. I'm also assuming that they probably tried to plan around it, likely by having an offense that moves enough to shift the defense just enough that you can create these little pockets of space. Now, we have seen how it works. The final thing I will say is the Raptors need to run. They need to run. Hang on. I dropped the recorder, and that's funny. I thought I had disconnected everything. Anyways, my recorder is absolutely shattered to shit. When I was on the last set, somebody broke it, so that kind of sucks. But whatever. Anyways, what was I saying? Yes. So I've lost my train of thought. Despite the effects of shooting. Yes. So the Raptors need to find ways to generate space within this motion offense. And I feel that they are struggling to do so because they have guys who are simply not catching on to some of the concepts of their motion offense. My specific targets for who is not catching on are Pascal Siakam, Precious Achiuwa, specifically those two guys. I think Gary, by nature of just how he plays, is creating a lot of space, but I don't feel he's always been on the same page. Dennis Schroeder is also massively, massively disrupting your spacing because he often is sagged off of. It's kind of like the same situation with Scotty, right? Like you run Scotty last year against Indiana, they go aggressive drop, right? They're not necessarily aggressively dropping against Dennis Schroeder, but if you look at the defense, how they've decided to guard him, I think most people are calling fluke on Scotty and Dennis as shooters right now. And defenses are more than comfortable, especially you'll see when you play against better coaches like tonight, when you play against better defenses. Not that the Indiana Pacers are necessarily a great defense, but when you play against better coaches, they'll have the scouting report on these guys, and it'll take a while for it to adjust. So if the shooting is real with Dennis and Scotty, if they continue to be 37 to 39% three-point shooters, then hallelujah. Your spacing issues are solved. The three-point shooting is not what is costing you wins right now. It's a whole bunch of other stuff that we won't really want to talk about. And I think we need to talk about it. I think we need to talk about it because last year, I seem to remember an entire media space insisting that the Raptors' problem was that they didn't have a center, that they didn't have a bench. Okay? Here's the problem. You have now taken two guys who have spent a lot of time starting for you in Precious Achiuwa and Gary Trent Jr. You've taken another guy who has started for you before in Chris Boucher. You've taken another guy who maybe some people expected to start at center for you last year when you signed him in Otto Porter, or at least be your sixth man. All of those guys are your bench. And you also have a 13th overall pick who's really struggling in Grady Dick, who's supposed to be able to shoot, but hasn't been able to shoot so far. You have a guy like Jalen McDaniels. He got minutes on a better team than you last year. So you have a lot of players, okay? And then you have Malachi Flynn, who's playing reasonably well, and his analytics would suggest that he is a low-level bench player right now who can fringe, get rotation minutes, okay? So either you ride this out and you call it luck, you call it shooting variance, you say, okay, eventually our shooters are going to start hitting these shots, and when they start hitting these shots, well, I mean, hey, man, if Jalen McDaniels and Grady Dick batted 20% for like an entire month, well, maybe they'll bat 50% for the next month and we'll be the best shooting team in the league for a couple of weeks. Maybe you get the other side of shooting variance because that's how shooting variance works, right? There's a lot of luck involved in shooting sometimes. I mean, you might think that it's just willing the ball in the hole, but sometimes it just doesn't go in, right? There are a lot of great shooters who have terrible nights. Jason Tatum is not a bad 3-point shooter. He shot 1 for 9 from 3 against the Raptors. It happens, okay? And it can happen for a pretty extended period of time. So I do believe long term, the Raptors have managed to at least solve some of their shooting issues. I think the wrong people are struggling. I think the wrong people are starting. I think the wrong people are playing together on the court. I think this will take some time. I hope at some point Darko Rajakovic is willing to examine his rotations, number one, examine his rotation patterns, number two, learn on the fly in terms of his defensive and offensive adjustments, three. Number four, it has cost you not, I think it's cost you just once, but it could have cost you many, 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 many times. Getting guys to the table a little bit late has been a bit of a pattern with this team. And it cost you against Boston with Scotty. I know it's pretty low-hanging fruit to blame everything on one substitution, but I think the difference between Scotty and Precious is a win in that game. And so I think, there are some things you're going to consider it growing pains with a rookie head coach coming into a new team, trying to implement a completely brand new offense. But there are some fruits. There are some positives. 6-8, not so bad. Tough schedule, yes. You have shooters who are not shooting well. You have non-shooters who are shooting well. If potentially, as I said, Dennis Schroeder and Scotty Barnes are for real, as in they are going to be above 35% from the year, then you don't have shooting issues, provided the rest of the guys can just be normal. Is it crazy to expect Jalen McDaniels to just shoot 34% from three? Is it crazy to expect Otto Porter, a career 40% three-point shooter, to shoot 40% from three? No, you have three-point shooting, but you don't have spacing. That is two separate issues that need to be addressed in two separate ways. See, when I say the Raptors don't have three-point shooters, I look at Masai. When I say the Raptors don't have spacing, I look at Darko. When I see that the Raptors don't have spacing because players refuse to move into the correct spots and buy into the offense, then I look at the players. And now I'm looking in the right place. And what I wanted to say before was that last year we were very quick to peg all of the Raptors' woes on the bench and on Scotty, on the bench, on lack of center. Well, guess what? Scotty's playing well. You have a center. In theory, you have a bench. You do have Otto Porter back. And your bench still sucks. And your offense still kind of sucks. So what is the common link here? That is who you should be talking about, but you're not talking about it. And I'm kind of sick of it. Okay, let's get to some comments, and we're going to keep this under an hour. I hope, I pray. Oh, Felicia, thank you so much, man. If you're the same Felicia from Instagram, thank you. Hoping Darko MVP, Dennis to the bench, and see what Gary in the starting lineup does. I agree. I really agree. And Dominic saying we definitely trading Pascal and Precious. I don't know about Precious, but I mean, I'm in and out on him. I see the potential. I'm totally in on the upside. I get it. I mean, yeah. Darko has been horrible as a coach. I don't think he's been horrible as a coach. I think he's been a first-year head coach. He's certainly not horrible at all. He was here to do something. He is doing it. He is changing the culture slowly, surely. You don't change it overnight. He mentioned that. You're not going to change it overnight. He's here to develop. Well, I see Precious getting development reps. I see OG getting development reps. I see Scotty doing things that he hasn't been asked to do before. And as much as it's not happening as fast as I want it to, maybe I am blind to the fact that he is simply not skilled enough right now to do the things that I want him to do. And that will come too. Maybe it'll come by the end of the year. Maybe it'll be the start of next year. If you've looked around the NBA right now, who are the players that are really, really, really popping off other than Chet Holmgren and Scotty Barnes? It's really Tyrese Maxey, Tyrese Halliburton, LaMelo Ball, and Anthony Edwards. What do all four of those guys have in common? You want to guess? They're all in the 2020 draft. This is year 4 for all those guys. Year 4 is a really big year for stars taking a jump to something close to what they'll be in their prime. And I think it's very possible that, everything is being geared for next off season. Hopefully that means that we're not just going to let, assets walk out the door like Pascal and Gary because we don't want to sign them. Obviously, if there is a plan for those guys in place here, then, hopefully that plan comes to fruition and we're not sitting there panicking on free agency day like, oh no, is this about to happen again? If the plan is to trade those guys, then I think sooner the better. But naturally, Messiah's going to do what he's going to do on his timeline. I can't rush that. Yeah, certainly. Yeah. Anyways, guys, have a great one. And I'll get the last night's live up right after this, maybe in about half an hour. And to everyone wondering if I've slept, I have not. So I went right back to the bad habit, but I'm going to sleep for about a few hours now and wake up and start my day again. And hopefully I don't like pass out during the Indiana live. Um, because this is towards the end of the live, I want to be very transparent and honest about why the previous live was, oh, hey, thanks a lot, man. Really appreciate it. Priceless entertainment. That's cool, man. Thank you. Respect your hustle and dedication. Great videos. Thank you. The previous live was previously moved to private because during a conversation in which I was not aware of the events surrounding Samson yesterday, a caller brought up our Twitter beef, and I went in a little bit and I started talking about it. And it wasn't super disrespectful, but it was disrespectful enough that I felt it was very tacky in light of everything that happened with Samson. I wanted to scrub out that 10, 12-minute video, 10, 12-minute segment. It's not useful. It's not relevant. It's in bad taste. It's in really bad taste. I watched what happened with Samson and I was honestly mortified. Honestly, my heart sank. He's 27 years old. And I read the Twitter that he's okay. I'm really happy to hear that. He's a really important part of the Raptors community. He's worked really hard. He's 27 years old. I've been there. Like I've been a very ambitious person trying to carve my way through. Um, I've been very hard on him this year because of the Pascal Siakam post up shit. But honestly, overall, I respect the guy and I don't want something that I've said. And then, of course, like a minute after I said it, someone was just like, "Hey, man, I think Samson just had a stroke or something on thing," and I was just like, "Oh my god." So yeah, it was just a shitty thing, and really crappy timing, to be honest. Twitter beef is not Twitter beef is not relevant, in the grand scheme of someone's life, where someone having a stroke or someone having a serious health problem at 27 years old or 28 years old, however old he is. So, anyways, that was that, and also I do want to say this was kind of, sad slash funny. I did check out the Real GM poll, and they actually I want to show you guys this. This is hilarious, actually. No, I don't want to show you this. Forget it. It'll give too much attention to it. But yeah, so that there's apparently a Real GM poll about the worst Raptors content creator, and I am the worst content creator in the Raptor space by like twice. I think the second runner up is Sean Woodley. I didn't think I was worse. Like, I know I piss people off, but that's extreme. Um, I want to share this just as a parting note before I head off to sleepy time. That is terrifying. Like on a crazy level, it is absolutely mortifying to think that there's an entire forum of people that are discussing you and completely shitting on you and saying things that are objectively, a lot of those things are just really not true. And they are voting you as the worst at what you do. And it is like, I gotta be honest, like I can only imagine 10 years ago something like that happened to me. I would be very, very sad. But yesterday when I read it, I took it in fun. I posted it on Twitter and I said it's good to win at something. It didn't bother me. I'm very proud of that. It did not bother me. And it was you can probably tell like I'm hiding a smile. Like I'm not smiling that I was voted as the worst Raptors content creator. I'm actually really just smiling that it doesn't bother me. That's a really big, big, big place to be, instead of like getting all like obsessed over it and why do these people dislike me? I precisely understand why they dislike me. Don't worry. If I thought what they thought, I'd dislike me too. That's BS. Don't watch that. Oh, it's cool, man. Like it's totally fine. I mean, you're telling them that their favorite player is not very good, and you're telling them the guy that they think is autistic and a terrible player is like a superstar before they're ready to accept it. They're gonna hate you. I get it completely, and you know, Fair enough. All right, guys, take care. Have a great one. And again, thank you guys for the super chats. And if you missed last night's live, there's some really good chats in there. Like, there's some really interesting retrospectives of the Raptors championship, what might be going on with Masai on the board. It's a good one. I didn't want to delete the whole thing. I just wanted to scrub out those 12 minutes because I thought it was in bad taste. Anyways, take care, guys. Have a great one and see you tonight.